You're tuned in to Women in America, the podcast that dives deep into the issues shaping gender equality in the U.S. and beyond. Hosted by Pari and Eve, public health professionals by day, content creators by passion, we bring you expert insights, compelling stories, and actionable strategies to push the fight for equality forward. So in this episode, we make the shift from a pre-recorded series on the foundational elements of abortion to a weekly gab session on politics and what we're tracking in the news, specifically as it pertains to the impact on women in America. Pari returns to us from maternity leave, yay! And we catch up on all the things that have gone down since she left us in January and where that leaves us now. Let's dive in. So, Pari.
Hey!
Hey! We talked about how we were just going to start gabbing through this because we were doing some foundational abortion information education episodes, and now we're going to be recording every week to talk about more relevant stuff.
We're going to attempt to anyway.
We're going to attempt to, which is hilarious because when we first started this, we were like, what are we going to talk about? And then we went through 8 episodes, and now we're going on to continuing content every week.
It's just a reflection of even our account when we first started. I don't know if you remember, but we were sitting in that coffee shop when we hit our first post, and I had asked you, what if we don't have enough stuff to talk about every day? How naive we were. Because now it's like every hour I'm trying to determine between the new fresh hell that we're in, like which of these 800 pieces of horrible things should I talk about today?
Okay, but I'm surprised to hear you say that a little bit because you had to step back for a little bit. You've theoretically, and for those who can't see our video, quote unquote, step back because you had a big life moment.
I did.
What have you been up to?
Yeah, so I had a baby.
Damn.
What a time to have a baby.
Yeah, you had a baby in January before the inauguration, almost on January 6th.
Don't you dare say it. As soon as you said almost, I was like, I know where she's going with this.
But you
and the sheer audacity. Yeah, but that baby was absolutely attuned to what was going on in my mind because she was like, oh, tomorrow's Jan 6th, we're coming out today.
Yeah.
So she made it just in time on the 5th.
If you had her on the 6th, I would not have brought it up. It's only because she rightfully missed the deadline on purpose.
Yeah, a few folks were trying to make me feel more comfortable with the possibility. And they were saying things like, you know, if she comes on the 6th, then that'll help you redefine that date and so on and so on. And my response was always, hey, we live in the United States, and at least to the reasonable half of this country, Jan 6 will always mean one thing. And it honestly should mean one thing because now everyone's trying to rewrite history somehow. Right. Yes, but she arrived.
I think most of our listeners will know what happened on Jan 6th, but for anybody who was living under a rock, we're talking about the insurrection when Trump made a speech and average American rally goers stormed the Capitol, and it was a very dark day in America.
Yeah, and those people have since received a full presidential pardon because that is the new America that we live in.
But they did go to jail for a little bit.
Just a touch.
just
a little tiny bit.
And some of them continued to commit crimes and then were sent right back to jail after they were pardoned because
they really took
horrible people.
It's almost like the Final Destination version of Jan 6. You remember the movie that all millennials are so intense about? I still can't drive my car behind a truck that has tree logs in it. And everyone who knows what I'm talking about will probably feel the same PTSD from that scene. But yes, the Jan 6 insurrectionists really took Final Destination vibes to a whole new level because they all got presidential pardons for this horrible thing they did. So then they went and committed a bunch of other crimes. And now several of them, I think more than 70% of them actually are back in prison for things that they've done since they received the presidential pardon.
Crazy.
Which is truly incredible. Anyway.
Okay, so in order to not focus your birth on January 6th, what else? What have you been up to since January 5th?
Okay, so I had a baby girl. Uh,
Yay!
my partner and I had decided not to find out the sex beforehand. So when she arrived, it was really fun and cute. And he actually confirmed with the doctor before he whispered it in my ear just to make sure that he
Okay,
got it right.
good.
And people might
No,
think that's
no
funny.
misinformation here.
Exactly, but people might think that's funny and be like, "What? It's pretty obvious." It's actually not because sometimes when the babies come out, their parts are all swollen. So, anyway, and one of our friends made the mistake of announcing that he had a boy when it in fact was a girl. And B was like, "Excuse
Oh,
me, no, that's not."
oh my
So,
God.
heard that story and was like, "Hey, we are going to be confirming multiple times before I let you know what's happened." She is wonderful, truly just so joyous, and it's been fun watching her change.
Hmm.
And that is why I took a step back because I wanted to be more present in that
Hmm.
time. Unfortunately, I am still a public health person and still a woman in America and still someone who actually gives a damn about this country. And
So,
it has,
despite all of my pleas
yes,
to,
you have been
for you to
very,
for you to not be clocking the news and your text saying, "What about this?" and da 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 da, and I'm like, Pari, log off,
it's
log off.
honestly impossible.
Yeah.
Although some reflections that I'm about to share. The first is it's possible because, well, yours and my algorithms are so finely tuned for our normal lives because we're constantly interested in the stuff that it was actually impossible to log off.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to either basically put my phone away for the day or just be ready to consume what's happening in the world. But one reflection I will say has come up during this time is it's made me understand how easy it can be for people to not actually know about any of this stuff, you know? Like if they truly did have a different algorithm, if they weren't interacting with other people who thought this way, if they were intentionally disconnecting or willfully disconnecting,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to defend the oh, I don't get into politics crowd, but it's shockingly easy to think that none of this is going to affect you if you're just completely blind to what's happening, you know?
Well, and you can cleanse your algorithm however you want,
Pretty,
right? So
yeah.
I have a friend who is very politically tuned in, but in this environment has been very stressed out about all of the chaos that's happening. And for her own mental health, like cleansed her algorithm so that it's literally all puppies and shirtless men. And she was not kidding. She built that brick by brick. And I looked at her Instagram feed, and that's pretty much all that it was. So
Yeah.
she has successfully avoided all of the news through social media unless she actually like goes into her news apps and looks at it, which I hope she's doing, but kind of don't blame her if she's not.
Credit to her.
Yeah.
That life is not for me.
Yeah.
And I've proven it by the fact that even in the thick of postpartum, even while in the trenches, I'm somehow more bothered by the orange Cheeto man in office than I am by like sleep deprivation torture, you
Right.
know?
But I
So,
think it's funny that some of our algorithm has changed because for people who don't know, like Pari and I share, I mean, we have our own personal social media accounts, but we share the Gemma Talks account. And
mhm.
so when either of us Google anything on that count, it will slightly shift the algorithm. And so there's definitely more pregnancy and newborn posts, content that pop up. It
Oh,
could
is
just
there?
be because I mean, I noticed it. I assumed it was because
Mhm.
you were searching things,
I
but
definitely have not been, but
okay.
it is both a blessing and a curse how good these algorithms are figuring stuff out.
Mm,
I don't think
mhm,
people know this, but, and frankly, this is totally separate from what we were talking about, but it's an interesting anecdote is that a lot of the social media algorithms right now are based on machine learning, right? And
mm,
obviously, since the advent of machine learning, AI has come in and changed a whole bunch of things. But the story I want to share is that when machine learning was first starting to be introduced, the large corporations were using it as a way to like track people's spending behaviors, right? And Target learned that a woman was pregnant before she even knew she was pregnant
this is
because
such a
of
good story.
yeah, because of the things that she had started to buy. So,
Ugh.
for example, she used to, on a regular cadence, purchase scented wet wipes. And then she all of a sudden was no longer able to handle the scent of the wet wipes. So she switched to unscented. And there were several different things that like that happened within like the first few weeks of her pregnancy. And Target's whatever machine it's called, but that machine learned that this woman was pregnant before she even knew it. So they sent this like congratulatory Target box of supplies to her house because they thought it would be a cool marketing thing to do. And her dad received the box, freaked out, sued Target, and turns out that Target's machine was actually right. And she either, I can't remember if she didn't know herself or she had not yet told her parents. And so it turned into this big hullabaloo. But can you imagine? So that's how sophisticated they used to be like 10 years ago. And
Mhm.
now algorithms have become so much better, so much more fine-tuned to the point where now, to your point, Eve, sometimes I think that I just wonder a thought to myself, and somehow TikTok's like, I knew you were thinking about this. Let me show it to you.
That happens to me. That happens to me. And I think most people will notice it, especially if you don't control your microphone settings on your phone, that like your phones are listening to you. And if you're talking about something with a phone nearby, it probably will show up on your Instagram feed as an ad.
Yeah, it's truly amazing.
Ugh.
It's okay.
Creeps me
So
out.
it also reminds me, Eve, of when we went to France for my wedding.
Uh-huh.
And within the first 2 days of being there, there were these bunch of internal jokes within our group of friends about Aperol Spritz. And all of a sudden, everyone was getting commercials for Aperol Spritz on their phones
Yeah.
when they had previously never heard of this drink.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's the same thing, but it's truly incredible.
You know
But
what just
yeah,
happened to me most recently? Do you remember we were catching up on the phone the other day and I was talking about the Equal Entrance brand?
oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like telling you about how this woman had started this apparel company. She had started an activist blog and then she had grown it into apparel and then specifically like scarves for scarf wearing women who want to show their
Mm,
activism. And then I was telling you that I wanted to buy one of these. And then when we got off the phone and I opened my Instagram,
you got
the
it.
ad was there.
Amazing.
The ad was there. And did I buy it? Yes. And do I regret that decision? Absolutely not, because I love the scarf. But like, so I'm torn because
That's
it
what I
can
said,
make,
for better or for worse.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it can make your life more convenient, but it's very creepy.
It is, but honestly, what isn't these days,
Yeah,
So it's like if this is making my life more convenient in the moment, I'll take it. Or
I
if it's showing me
know.
products that I'm excited about anyway, I'll take it. Then I know
Well,
that I have to be a little bit more like disciplined about what I care about or what I invest in or whatever it
I
is.
mean, that's
Because
like the whole argument against the TikTok ban is like, oh my God, they're stealing your data. I'm like, everybody has my flipping data anyway. I'm not a CIA agent, so like, I don't care. Take my data.
yeah. And I feel like people will call us naive about that, but
Mhm.
I see
Oh,
it as the opposite.
I'm sure that comment will piss off many people if it reaches the wrong folk.
Yeah. I personally though see it very much as the opposite, is that okay, people are now going in eyes open to situations that they previously weren't. I mean, this is a
Mhm.
very extreme example, but like, Julian Assange and Edward Snowden are in prison for things that are now like widely accepted to be true.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's because of them. But I sometimes think about how, without getting into specifics of their cases, like if they had come out and said what they had said now, would anyone even care? Because it's just like, oh, these are things that are known.
Yeah.
And again, perhaps some top level security experts will be like, you don't know what you're talking about. That's totally fair. I'm not an expert in this
Yeah.
arena whatsoever. I
No,
am
we
simply
are
an
public
average
health
person.
experts. Yeah.
Yeah. I am simply an average person wondering out
Yeah.
loud, what if, that's it.
Okay, so
But
we may not care about the Julian Assange stuff now, but I am curious. Like, I know that we joke about how you have been kind of online, but you have been off somewhat
mhm,
for good
yes,
reasons. So
I forced
I'm
myself to take a step back,
good.
and it's been annoyingly beautiful. Do you know what I mean by
Okay,
that?
yeah.
Like, you and I often joke. about how even though we don't let it get to us, even though we've built up a thick skin, even though we're very well versed with what the GOP is doing on a daily basis,
Mm-hmm.
we often wonder, like, is this changing our psyche a little bit? Is this
Mm-hmm.
affecting us in ways that we maybe can't see yet? Is
Mm-hmm.
the social media generation still awaiting like the negative impacts of all of this? And one of the other reflections or realizations I've had from disconnecting is just how nice it has been to be able to be super passionate and excited about something that has nothing to do with the state of the
Yeah.
country. You know what I mean? And that's
Yeah.
not to say that you and I don't have casual hobbies. Of course we do. But this is different. This is, you're it's it's taking the whole of me, and
Mm-hmm.
it's all, and I want to be able to dedicate my whole life to um my family and her future and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
it has made me wonder whether you and I need to be better about disconnecting when we need to and taking those breaks and stepping back. And when I say wonder, I mean I absolutely think we have to. And
Yeah.
being the workaholics that we are, that will be tough. But I really, yeah, that's been one of my
Well,
takeaways. Like my list of things to talk to Eve about is just, yeah.
you will be proud to know then that I have looked into meditation, like guided meditations at
Oh,
a Buddhist temple nearby.
I love that. Tell me more. How did this idea come about?
I was just coming home from work every day. My head was like swirling with stuff, and I just felt so like disoriented. And then to have to go into that to straight to, I would like have dinner, I might go to the gym, but then I have to go straight into content creation. I can't do it during the day because I'm working. So my days were like go to work 9 to 5, commute home for an hour. Sometimes commuting home, I would like listen to podcasts or something to catch up on the news from the day, have dinner, take the dog out, go to the gym if I'm lucky, and then come home and figure out how I put together like a meaningful, well researched post. And my
Mm-hmm.
head was just spinning. So I don't really like yoga. I don't like the slow burn. Very unusual for a basic bitch like myself, but like I'm not a yoga person. I like really heavy cardio stuff, which
Mm-hmm.
does help with like the mental cleanse, but not in the same way as like being mindful and present. And so I was just thinking I need to work something else into my routine that is not just making my heart almost explode, sweating bullets in the gym every couple of days. And so I went to a guided meditation last Sunday or the one before that. And I it was at like 1 p.m. and it was a half hour. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of my day, I went about per usual, but with more clarity and intention and focus than any time I've walked out of the gym from like boxing or my step classes or whatever. It was kind of life changing.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, it
I'm
was very
I'm
interesting.
very impressed that you got it. I don't know how to
Yeah.
say this. Like I have never tried religiously, haha. Um, but I think I've struggled with meditation in the past because my brain refuses to just slow down. And you know this about me. I also have difficulty sleeping because I'm
Hmm.
always like, oh, here's these 1,800 things that I need to think about now for some reason.
Hmm.
So I'm going to look to you for wisdom on
Sure.
how to calm all of the voices and also all of the news
Well,
notifications.
let me caveat that by saying, have I gone back? No, not yet. And I'm
Okay,
planning
not
on it.
yet.
Not yet. But I realized that I haven't been able to incorporate it regularly in my life because I don't have the self-discipline to just do it when I'm at home by myself. I need to go be in the place with other people, with a live human walking me through it so that I'm accountable to sitting and staying there. And then I
Hmm.
hope after I'm able to build a routine of at least going weekly, that I will learn how to do it at home by myself. So
Yeah,
that's the
I mean,
plan.
there's a lot of apps as well. Was the
Yeah.
class free?
It was free. Yeah, it was free. They do community classes every week. And I actually found a second location that's a totally different kind of institution that also does weekly free classes. So it's nice to
Mm-hmm.
have two options. And then the other thing I did
Okay.
was I booked tickets to Mexico and just decided to get the fuck out.
Amazing. I love that for you. I really hope you're able to come back. And I say that mostly in jest.
We will see if I come back. Yeah.
If you want to, and then if you're allowed
And if
to.
I'm allowed to, I
Yeah.
know.
I'm sort of joking, but also not really. Yeah.
There's been a lot of people, especially green card holders, that have been stopped at the border recently. And while I'm not a green card holder, I can imagine that they're kind of just stopping whoever they want now.
Yeah. Some people will think that this is an extremist thought, but I don't really see it as like being about immigration status anymore. It's truly just an excuse for state-sponsored racism.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that because, people are getting taken from their apartment buildings for expressing pro-Palestine views, like
Mm-hmm.
even though they have complete legal authority to do that and they haven't done anything that harms anybody else. And it's truly sad to see how
Mm-hmm.
things are going. But the reason I asked about the class being free is because, this week trying to think a lot about how to take more of a role in community
Mm-hmm.
systems and networks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that just because I have a kid. I'm mostly saying that because of this new spending bill that was just passed in
Mm-hmm.
Congress, which, I want to dive into in a minute, but just
Mm-hmm.
basically sharing is like, I think that people are going to start relying more and more on things like you mentioned, like these community-oriented classes
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, gardens or network, basically ways in which you can still access some sort of therapeutic care or rehabilitation or whatever
Mm-hmm.
by just being involved with your community
Mm-hmm.
because it's getting harder and harder to rely on the government now for
Yeah.
services that should be standard.
Mm-hmm. Like with the
Yeah.
Medicaid cuts.
Yeah. It's so
Yeah.
I don't want to use this word because I know that people are struggling right now, but it's genuinely depressing to think about. Like
Mm-hmm.
the loss of 880, is it 880 or 890?
880 billion.
880 billion from Medicaid. Eh, Do do people even understand?
Sorry. We're laughing and like still the shock of it because that's just
Yeah,
like
it's
such a
not,
large
this
cut.
is not happy laughter. This is like
No.
laughter to cope, but I don't genuinely do not believe that people fathom what that means. First of all, I don't think people understand the difference truly between a million and a billion, right? Because none
No.
of us have ever been in a position to even need to know the difference between
Yeah.
those. But I don't think people fathom it. And then second, the impacts of this are going to be so intense and far-reaching, and it is wild to me. People are going to be seeing how this falls for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we've already seen in several states that the GOP is, instead of actually dealing with the problems, they're just getting rid of the people who are collecting data to
Mm-hmm.
prove that the problems exist. So I am so convinced that, first of all, everyone is going to be struggling super hard in ways that they haven't even come to realize yet. And second, that nobody's going to be willing to admit that that was a direct result of this Medicaid cut because
Mm-hmm.
the GOP won't let that happen.
Mm-hmm.
But, I was thinking about how I got my hospital bill for delivery recently.
Oh God, how much was it? Are you going to tell
It's-
us?
yeah, it was $62,000
And did you go to a public or private hospital?
public.
Wow. $62,000?
Yeah. Well,
How
okay.
long were you in the hospital for?
Okay, so I labored for 2 days at home, as you
Mhm.
know, because I was texting you.
Yes, and I was like, go to the fucking hospital.
Well, they don't even let you go until
I
you're a
know.
certain way
I know.
along. So for 2 days I was laboring. And then on the night of the second day, basically for the all of the second day, I had this gut feeling that something was different.
Mhm. Because it
Because I
was
was,
in your
yeah,
gut.
right. Irony. Um, I I kept feeling like she was moving less than before. And so
Mm-hmm.
I called my OB a few times and I was like, hey, I am feeling this. And then they have this like medical standard for fetal movement, which is like you have to count however many movements you feel, and you're supposed to feel at least like 14 per hour at that latest stage in pregnancy. And I was meeting that criteria. But I couldn't shake this feeling because normally she moved so much that I never had to count. Like, I was never worried about it, never occurred to me. So even the fact that like for a whole day I kept having this recurring thought where I'm like, I don't feel like she's, at the time I didn't know it was a she, but anyway, I don't feel like she's moving that much. And so when I called the third time, the OB was like, listen, you haven't been able to shake this, even though you're meeting the medical standard. You, only you know this fetus best, so you need to come in. So I did, but then she was also like, you're 4 days away from your due date. So if you come in today, like you are not leaving without giving birth.
Yeah.
And
You
that
will
gave me,
give birth.
yeah, that gave me slight pause because I'm like, what if I'm wrong? Like, what if I'm just misunderstanding this or whatever, all the ways in which women
And
question themselves.
it was really important to you to have a natural birth. And by that, I just mean you didn't want to be induced at the time. So that was
Yeah.
also like giving you pause because you didn't want to go in and then be forced to induce.
Yeah. And also, I think in my head, I was like, well, if contractions have begun, then why would I go through induction, right? So,
Hmm.
anyway, I went in and turns out that that gut feeling was absolutely correct. And her heartbeat was dropping every time I was having contraction. So, I had to have an emergency section. And, but I'm saying that to say that aside from that, everything about my birth was straightforward, from a medical perspective, I mean, like that I
Hmm.
didn't need anything different than like the typical C-section requires. I didn't even labor while I was in the hospital. I labored at home. I only showed up there when they were like, hey, something is wrong, type thing. And when I say something is wrong, I mean like the thing that was wrong just turned into us having a C-section, right? Which plenty of people do.
Hmm.
So to see that bill was just like, oh wow, this is crazy.
Hmm.
And we're lucky we have great insurance. So our out-of-pocket cost was much, much less than that.
Hmm.
But it is wild when you actually go through this itemized bill and I'm looking at it and like they're charging me, for example, $8 for a single Tylenol, right? But they charge you for skin to skin, which like what? I produced the thing that you are now charging me to
Can you
hold.
explain that? Like for them
Yeah,
to have
so
you hold the baby, they charged you to hold your own baby?
yeah, so basically, and I don't understand why this is, and frankly, I should probably like, just for my own understanding, like get in touch with an insurance person and just be like, explain your reason. Although they probably won't, and that's why things like what happened to the United States Healthcare CEO happened.
Hmm.
Anyway, so yeah, basically on your hospital bill, it's a whole itemized list, right? They go like line by line of every single thing that they've charged you for. And there's one line that says skin to skin. And it's like $36 or something like that. And basically, if you want to be able to touch your baby after it has come out, they have to physically hand it to you, right? Because if you have a vaginal birth, they're down there with the baby, so they hand it to you. If you have a C-section, they put it over the curtain and hand it to you. And apparently they charge you $36 for that small action.
So to avoid that charge, the baby would just be put in like the okay, I've never given birth, so I'm gonna call it a
That's
baby
okay.
cart. A baby
Yeah.
cart? What does it go into?
Honestly, Eve, I don't know. Like, can you even avoid that charge? I'm just the fact that there is a charge for that is batshit
I
crazy.
mean, did they give you a choice? Did they say, do you want to hold the baby, or was it they just handed it to you? Her.
So the way it works is that you establish your birth plan beforehand
Yeah.
and you explain it to your OB and you write it out, print out many copies, they put it in multiple folders. And in
Mm.
my case, because it's like I went in at 10:30 p.m. and within 5 minutes, 10 minutes of me being on the monitor, like they put two monitors on you. They measure your contractions and they measure heartbeat.
Hmm.
And within 10 minutes of being on there, they were like, hey, this is you, we can't wait because, the heart rate keeps dropping. So then in that case, like I had the OB come in, talk to me about the procedure. The anesthesiologist came in, talked to me about the procedure. So I had a chance to have FaceTime with them and explain what I wanted. And
Mhm.
obviously, when you have a C-section, you lose a lot of control. Like
Mhm.
when you have a birth, not always, of course, but I'm saying like if everything goes smoothly, there are things you can control. And in a C-section, you have to kind of forego pretty much all of that. The one thing you can ask for is once the baby is out of you, that they give you skin to skin. But because you're C-section, you're like this on a table. You're like Jesus on the cross, kind
Oh
of,
my God.
and your hands are held down.
What?
And yeah, because like just in case you have like an adverse reaction to something, they need to be able to settle you or whatever
Who's
the
holding
medical
your
term for
hands
it is.
down?
It's straps. And I know it sounds scary, but it's not. It's not like it's as in it might be to other folks. It wasn't to me because I first of all I knew it was coming. I mean, I knew that there were straps. And second, like you I felt very comfortable with the people in the room. So yeah. I imagine it can be jarring for people to hear that, but I think it's more from it's a safety thing versus before, it was probably not a safety thing.
Mm.
It was more like a mental health thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is they're like, oh, do you want skin to skin? Which in the case of a C-section is literally just like they put the baby's cheek against your cheek because
Mm.
that's all they can do really.
Hmm.
And then we took a family photo. So like I'm on the table, like not really. I was kind of out of it. I was very, very nauseous. I was fully conscious that she was there. I said I talked to her when she arrived. I started to experience this like extreme wave of nausea as soon as she arrived. So they just
Uh,
like took the photo and then immediately like I just looked at the anesthesiologist and I was like, it's happening because she
oh.
had warned me that I might. Yeah. Anyway, my point is simply like imagine I got charged $36 for having her cheek to my cheek.
Best $36 ever spent
I mean,
though, no?
obviously, but like, what is wrong with our healthcare
Wait,
system, right?
have I seen that picture?
No, I should send it to you.
Yes, please do.
Yeah,
Because I have to say, the photos that you send me, even just from the hospital, I was like, did she hire a professional photographer? Are these airbrushed? Like, you looked chef's kiss, like, and you don't wear a lot of makeup, and I don't think you were wearing any makeup in those photos, but you looked beautiful, like almost
I,
annoyingly beautiful because you
I
had just
don't,
given birth.
I didn't feel that way at all.
Yeah.
And I did actually put concealer on for those pictures
Ooh la la.
because I had not slept in 4 days.
Yeah.
But yes, anyway, thank you. I think honestly, I just think she's just so beautiful that like
She is
it's
so
just, yeah,
beautiful.
it's just, yeah. Um,
So you kind of
but
already addressed this, but I wanted to ask you in the beginning, like because I know you've been tracking the news, but you've been like kind of hopefully a little bit one step removed. Like what news stories were still top of mind? What was making it through
yeah.
your offline
Well,
filter?
okay. So the 4 days that I was in the hospital, because if you have a C-section, even if everything is chill, they
Hmm.
keep you for that amount of time minimum.
Hmm.
I wasn't tracking a damn thing.
Hmm.
But also like the new administration hadn't begun.
Hmm.
So, I was like still in this like safety bubble of like, okay, we have not yet descended into madness.
Hmm.
Um, but since then, coming home and all of that, some of the stories that I have been tracking are the fact that he released 200 executive orders on day one.
Hmm.
My thought was like, do you even know what those are? Like, can you even keep track of them?
No, he just wanted to use a Sharpie to sign stuff.
Yeah. And I remember seeing that clip where the attendant would hand him one and he'd be like, which is this one? Which is a fair question to ask because you're signing 200 things at once.
Hmm.
But then the guy would explain and he'd be like, oh, yes, this is a very good one. And I'm like,
Yeah. You didn't even know what was being
like, you don't
handed to
even know
you.
what it is. You just heard the topic. And it's like, if you tell me this is the executive order about immigration, you signed 7 executive orders about immigration. How do you know which one it is? Like this, I'm saying this to be like, please, everybody, like have some critical thinking skills when it comes to media consumption because all of this nonsense is just sound bites
Hmm.
and like it's all fake. Everything is like,
There's so much
Anyway,
of it that's a smokescreen for like
yeah,
to conceal what they're really doing in the background. And I think you've asked me before, how do you decide what you're posting on? And it's honestly is even more work than it used to be because part of what I'm working to do in the background is like figuring out what is just sensational news versus what is really problematic.
Yeah,
It's hard to tell because
it
people are
seriously is.
reporting on everything, and their whole strategy, as we know, is flood the zone. And I
Mm-hmm.
have to admit, it is working for the general public. It is kind of working on me and other people I know who are reporting. I mean, it's very overwhelming and it takes a lot more work to sift through all of the garbage, like the Gulf of America thing. Like, that was dumb. That was garbage. We did not need to spend time on that. Now, what's in the news cycle is like Kim Kardashian posting with a Tesla, and it's like, all right, sure, like I'll unfollow her, but that does not need to be a whole. Actually, I'm mad I even brought it up now because we should not be giving that any airtime. But those are like the fluff pieces
Yeah,
while he's doing all this other psychotic, actually damaging stuff.
yeah. So, okay, so you were asking what I was tracking, and
Yes.
I think that to what you're saying, before Elon Musk came into the picture, which I think happened on what, day 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
I'm obviously he's been funding the campaign, everything, but I'm saying like the role he has now.
He took center stage with his Doge rule.
Right. Before he took center stage, it was harder to discern what was really bad in the now and what is going to be bad in the future versus what is just them saying bullshit
Mm-hmm.
to get people distracted, right? So the things that were sticking out to me before that, I was paying attention to like the people he was appointing for federal agencies, like RFK Jr., for example, which is I'm really frustrated that that came to fruition because, again, I think the impacts of that are going to be so long term and we're not even going to understand it. But after Elon came into the thing, it was like, okay, this, like, there is actual implementation happening by this man who doesn't understand a damn thing, but has been given the golden green light from this administration to gut everything. And then there's all the stuff that Trump is directly doing himself as opposed to endorsing and condoning.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think has made it a little bit harder to discern. But for me, like the spending bill was a huge one because I said, okay, they are proposing a $2.5 trillion tax cut for the billionaires. Where is that money coming from? Turns out it's coming from
Yeah.
the people most in need in this country
Yeah.
because what is more American than
Yeah.
that, right?
I
So
mean, it was coming from us, not us specifically, but like taxpayer dollars and social programs that are
yeah,
supporting people who actually need it.
yeah, that was a big one for me. Another big one for me was when the press secretary, Caroline Levitt,
Hmm.
her name should really be pronounced Leave It because she should be leaving all sorts of things alone, frankly. But yeah, when she was like, the administration has decided that the Constitution is not constitutional, and I was like, what?
You can't make this shit up.
And unfortunately cannot remember which of the 100 things she said that about because there was so much mad stuff that was happening. But she actually said a line like that, and I burst out laughing, even while being in the middle of all the postpartum stuff, because I was like, these people are truly mad.
Hmm.
And then obviously, like, there's things that are happening purely for distraction, like that disastrous AI video that they put out about,
Oh.
the Riviera and what they're
Hmm.
going to do with Gaza.
Hmm.
But the heartbreaking part about it is that even when you logically know this is a distraction or like this is something that they are truly just making up to take away from something bad that's coming, one, every time they say something like that, it normalizes someone to that idea,
Hmm.
and so it takes us closer to reality where that is actually possible.
Yeah.
And second, you then brace for like, okay, if they're trying to tell me about this very ridiculous thing that I know that the public is going to get riled up about, what's the real thing that they're trying to hide,
Hmm.
right? And that's also what it's getting so taxing. I think about the fact that we're only 2 months into this and we are now having to do so much more data sifting, evidence gathering, all of this information to try and have logical arguments in the face of something that is actually truly illogical.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what has bothered me so much about what's happened in the last week with Congress and this bill, because I feel like the Democrats are starting to experience some sort of internal chasm or split around this idea of like, hey, so half of us are assuming that there are still rules that exist, and the other half have recognized that like we are playing chess and they are playing whack-a-mole. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're not even the same universe.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really personally disappointing to see how that went down because
Mm-hmm.
it felt like the spending bill was the first time and I say we royally, we had some sort of leverage since this presidency started, and we decided to, at least in my opinion, completely squander it.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we had put out our Substack on Chuck
hmm
Schumer's decision, and my title was that he folded like a freaking lawn chair, and I'm still mad at him about it. But I think he felt like he needed to defend himself, and he came out with a New York Times article just yesterday or
yeah,
the
I
other
think
day that was
two
ex
days ago,
ex
time has no meaning for me anymore, so I trust your
like what
opinion
day
on
is
this
it?
more than mine. Yeah.
Where he was explaining that he was stuck between a rock and a hard place, which I think we can all recognize. I was looking for resistance and them Dems using this opportunity to say, fuck all of MAGA's plan. We are shutting this shit down. I mean, Musk and Trump have already basically dismantled the entire government. So, what is a government shutdown going to do at this point?
Yeah.
Schumer was arguing that if they had shut down the government, it would have allowed Trump and President Musk to cut all sorts of programs saying that they were non essential, um, which I can see the point there, but I still don't think that it was the right thing to do to sign off blatantly on this continuing resolution. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that his decision was totally thoughtless, but I just don't agree with what it was.
Yeah. In normal times, I think everyone would universally agree that a government shutdown is a bad idea, right? You're
But
hurting the
we
people.
are not in normal times because it is
Exactly.
2025 and we are dealing with a measles outbreak and tariffs like we're in the fucking Oregon Trail game. Like,
Exactly. So I know that a lot of us are tired of hearing this phrase, but we are truly in unprecedented
oh
times.
my God.
And in unprecedented times, I would have hoped, I can't even say thought, just hoped that the Democrats would recognize that it's time to start fighting fire with fire, you know? And so I will fully concede that it's not an easy decision. In no way is it, because frankly, the way that the GOP's narrative is and with the media, it's always like, regardless of what happens, the Democrats are the ones in the wrong. Even though the Republicans control every
Everything.
single branch of government right now, somehow it's the
It's
Democrats'
like
fault.
you have the White
Like,
House, you have the Senate, you have the House,
yeah,
but somehow it's all Democrats' fault, even though you
yeah.
control literally everything.
It's truly, it's like the same, it's like their classic approach, right? They're like, oh, well, Jan 6 was conducted by Antifa and BLM, and then Jan 6 receives presidential pardons all of a sudden. Well, why would you need a presidential pardon if Jan 6 wasn't committed by you? They're eating the cats and dogs,
Yeah.
but they completely stopped on November 6th. Weird how that happened.
Crazy.
Yeah, and the day after the election, everyone just randomly stopped doing that. So, but this is what I
Wild.
mean is that the reason why I think it bothered me so much was like, the average American is out here trying to find ways, or at least average American that we interact with, maybe not everybody.
Yeah.
But we always have people writing to us being like, hey, how can I take action? What can I do? Blah, blah, blah. And one of the things for the spending bill was there was such a clear ask. It was like, call your reps, tell them to vote no, right? And so many of our followers did that. And I know
Mhm.
that because they wrote to us being like, hey, this is this thing that I said to them. Here's how they responded to me. I'm going to call again in an hour. And we are also using our platform to make this ask of people to drive them to change and all of that. And it just felt like a huge disappointment, especially because it showed that there wasn't even agreement between the House and the Senate Dems.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, you guys need to sort your shit out.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's going to be harder and harder for people to justify why we are continuing to maintain the status quo when our competitors are doing no such thing,
Mhm.
So
And I will
it's,
say there was a lot of evidence that the calling works, and it
mhm,
has worked not just for the budget but for previous things where we've really laid it on thick. And I think one of the what was really hurtful about this is that there was a lot of momentum built around calling congressional members to the point where several congressional members, the ones that we thought were on the fence, voted no. And it was
Right.
in part because people were slamming the phone lines. They were getting
Mm-hmm.
like 4,000 calls every few minutes to the point where, like, my dad called and he couldn't get through. He couldn't get through. The voicemail was full. He's retired, so he had the time, but he had to look through all of Chuck Schumer's office numbers because he's got one in DC. He's got different office numbers in New York and different places. And I think he called like five different office numbers before he got through.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't have that time, but they made the time. And it did
Right.
shift how congressional members voted. I don't think people were expecting Chuck Schumer to, on Thursday, say that he is going to vote against it and then the next day do a
Change
complete
his mind.
about
Yeah.
face and change his mind. That was
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. So, and I want to say, like, it's very easy for me, Joe Schmo, or in this case, Pari Mari, to sit here in my living room and criticize, right? I understand that this is a tough decision. I'm not saying that it's straightforward. I'm not saying that you won't get heat regardless of what you do. But I think what was really hard for me is, Eve, like you and I basically volunteer our time to fight this fight every day. Like you and I have so far been very privileged. We've had a lot of resources. We are fighting for it, everybody, not just ourselves. And I think it was hard to be like, hey, if we are putting ourselves on the line, because we are, like, we get death threats, we get worse than death threats sometimes. Why can't our reps put themselves on the line? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's like your job. And several of them did. And I think that was also frustrating and confusing. Is like, so now you're telling me also that I can't rely on the fact that like you as a party represent something, because you're working across so many different facets or opinions on the same topic versus like as imbecilic, which I'm not even sure if it's a word, but I feel the passion and I want to call them
We're
imbeciles.
making it a word,
Yeah,
imbecilic.
as imbecilic as the GOP is, those assholes stick together on every damn thing,
Yeah.
which oftentimes is bad, right? But like when it works for them, it works for them. And it's like, why can't we be super united about anything?
Because I think it's easier to bond over malice and conspiracy and bad intentions, right? Like, I hate to give conservatives any credit at all, but they have a long term strategy. They had it in how they took down Roe versus Wade, right? When they overturned
Hmm.
the right to abortion. That was like a 50-year strategy where they chipped away at rights over and over again, year after year, decade after decade, until they got a case to the Supreme Court that actually overturned the court case. And we saw their whole plan in Project 2020, 2025. So I think they're very calculated in how they've planned all this out. I don't think they put any thought into operationalizing it, which is why it's a complete clusterfuck right now. And I don't think Elon Musk was ever really part of the planning of Project 2025. And now he's off doing his own shit. But at the end of the day, they are implementing everything that they said they would in that plan. And it was done in a very calculated way. It's being done in a very intentional way, and it's because they are evil fucking people.
It's so interesting you mentioned that because, I mean, agreed on that last point for sure. I also totally agree with you that they do have a long-term strategy. And maybe we are feeling that, especially because we work in reproductive health and we've
Mhm.
seen that, like I just as you said, their strategy on abortion was like one of the most clear-cut examples of them using a long-term strategy. I think, and I do agree with you that they do have one. I think what's amazing to me is because of how they've moved from like slow and steady, you know, the chipping away that you mentioned, to now just going balls to the wall, insane.
Yeah,
It's,
steamrolling.
yeah, what's interesting to me is how many Americans are feeling like now we're in a bad place, right?
Mhm.
When you and I have known that we've been in a bad place
Yeah,
for
but that's
like
because people don't
decades,
pay
if not hundreds of years.
attention. They
Yeah,
don't pay
yeah.
attention until it's really bad.
But the point I'm getting at is that I'm also curious how their strategy has shifted. Like,
Mhm.
they still have the same intention,
Mhm.
but now their approach is totally different. And I think that's why they're being I don't know if it's because the administration is not understanding something or what it is, but this comical situation of like, oh, hey, we're going to fire you. And then on Monday, we're going to rehire you. And then on Tuesday, we're going to tell you that you need to come back to work full time. And then on Wednesday, we're going to tell you to go take 6 weeks unpaid.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is just, that's kind of what they've been doing to federal employees. And it, I'm confused about how they think that they are going to be able to maintain even like their own base when they're hurting their own base, which we always knew was going to happen, right? Like we knew when we were advocating against a Trump presidency, it was never about just one group of people. It was like, this is actually going to touch everyone. Mm-hmm. You're just too clueless to see how. And now several of those people are, but it's scary to me and amazing that we have just lost all sense of, strategy or decorum or whatever it is. And I think that's another reason why I'm like, what are the Democrats doing? Like, is this the time for this party to die? Like, do we need something fresh and new out of the ashes? And I think a lot of people would argue that, yes, we do. And
I think telltale sign will be the midterms. And I'd like to say that we will have a new concrete strategy to take back one part of the House or something in the midterms. If they lose the midterms, I think the Democratic Party will be no more. Like, I don't know how they'd be able to sustain momentum for the party if they can't take anything back at the midterms.
I don't know if my lack of sleep has just made me a lot more dangerous as a person, but I have been asking myself, like, are we even going to have midterms? Like, are we 2 years from
now? I'm not ready. Don't put that out there yet. Take that back. Take that back. We're not putting that out in the universe yet.
I mean, yeah, it's just if a private, unelected individual citizen is able to make the decision that he is currently making, if legal like immigrants are being arrested and deported for simply expressing opinions, if Marco Rubio is tweeting that like anyone who says this can be deported regardless of citizenship status, if the Office of Personnel is tracking the activity of abortion activists online, like you and me and Jessica Valenti and so on, it does beg the question, like, are we going to have a functioning government in 2 years? Hell, in 6 months?
We keep going until we can't go anymore. Remember to take breaks this week and do something for yourself, even if that's just sitting alone in your car for 10 minutes before heading home for some mindfulness exercises, because if we can't sustain ourselves, then we can't sustain one another either. If your self-care includes some retail therapy, make sure you check out Equal Entrance for awesome activist scarves and some other cool swag. You know we love supporting a small women-owned business here. Make sure you subscribe to Women in America to catch all new episodes from us each week, and we'll see you next time.